So this week, what we're going to go over and touch upon is going to be kind of the two-dimensional aspects of Revit. We're going to touch on the annotation, all right, so everything kind of underneath the annotation tab, everything from dimensions to window, door tags, right, wall tags, 2D text. We'll go over how you can draw in some 2D lines as well as kind of put in a little bit of 2D detailing, all right. So we'll go over that as well. And then we'll also get into how you can start setting up some views to get ready to print out onto sheets. All right, and kind of the method that we're going to kind of use to sort out those views, save a view template, right? That way you can use those settings kind of moving forward from there. All right. So to start out is, again, I've kind of started with a blank page here. All right, and a blank project rather. Again, if you're using a file from a previous week, is by all means that's perfectly acceptable. If not, make sure that you start with the architectural template. Okay. So to kind of get started and give us something to work with here is I'm just going to give myself some walls. All right, so we can draw some dimensions and things to them. All right, so if we go pick any of your wall types, all right. Generally, if you can pick a wall type that at least has some layers and materials already associated with it, all right, you don't need to pick necessarily an exterior or interior. It doesn't really matter, but just pick one that already has some layers in it. And if they don't have any layers and you want to make your own, feel free to. All right, but just don't choose any of the generic ones that are just a generic thickness. All right, just pick one that has a few different layers associated with it. All right, that way when we cut some sections through it, we have something that looks pretty good. All right, so I'm just going to pick this exterior brick on metal stud. All right, put myself up, walls up to level 2. All right, again, I'm just going to kind of give myself a box here, and I'm going to also go and throw some interior walls in here as well. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. So now that we have some walls here, all right, again, now let me throw in some windows and doors just for a little bit of context. All right, the size of these doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the placement of them wherever you're putting them. All right. Just for a little bit of context. Okay, so you can go ahead and do that. All right, again, I'll throw some doors in here as well. Not really worrying where they're placed, but more for context than anything. All right. Okay. So now that we have some doors and windows here, and we have some walls as well. Okay, you can go all the way through and do a floor if you'd like. All right, if you want to go and do, ceiling, roof, make yourself a whole enclosure. You can go ahead and do that. But just for kind of purposes of what we're doing here, is I'm not going to bother. Okay. So one of the first things we're going to want to go over is just go ahead and go to the Annotate tab itself. All right, and we'll kind of go through kind of from the left side, scroll over to the right here, and go through all of these tools. All right, how we can use them. Is one of the first things that is going to be probably the most common thing that you use in the Annotate tab, right, is going to be dimensions. Okay, so as you can see on the left side here, we have dimensions, right? Essentially, dimensions are made up of either aligned dimensions, okay, linear dimensions, angular dimensions. Okay, we have radial dimensions, right? So to get the radius of a curve, right, diameter. You have arc length dimensions, okay. And then what you have what are called spot dimensions. Okay, so spot elevation, spot coordinate, and spot slope. Basically, these dimensions are going to give you, in this case, an elevation or coordinate of an exact spot. So if you're looking at something in a section view or a 3D view, and you click on the spot elevation, tool, all right, you can click on any given spot, all right, or any given point in your model, and it'll give you that elevation, all right. Same with the coordinate. You can choose any sort of spot in your model. Will give you the coordinates for it, obviously based on the coordinate system that you have in your model. So if you go through that much detail and set it up properly, all right, is you can go and use that tool there. And then spot slope, which is nice as well, is as you're drawing in, construction documents for your roof or anything like that, right, you can do the spot slope and it'll tell you the slope of a given surface, okay. But again, so just kind of a little bit of difference there with those spot elevations, or the spot dimensions rather, is those really take the reading off of one given point as opposed to, over length or anything like that, okay. But one of the first things that I want to show you guys, all right, is probably the most used dimension that you're going to want to use, all right, is going to be the line dimension, okay, and that's going to be, like I said, the one you're going to use the most, even if you're using it for not only drawings, but kind of using it as a working tool to spot check yourself, all right, and I always recommend as you're going through and building your models and putting things in place is that you do throw dimensions onto your models from time to time, all right, just to kind of spot check yourself, all right. But before we place that one out there, all right, is one thing that I do want to note quickly as well is you've probably noticed as you're drawing walls or placing doors and windows and everything else, right, or if you click on one of the objects, is you get these blue dimensions that pop up here, all right, is when dimensions pop up in blue like this, all right, is Revit calls those temporary dimensions, right, temporary because, once you deselect the item or you go and you place, your window or door there, all right, is they disappear, okay. The dimensions that we'll be placing under the Annotate tab here with the aligned, all right, these are all called permanent dimensions, all right, because you go and you place these dimensions and they stay showing on your view, okay. So that's just the kind of the difference between the two of those. Now, kind of what I'd like to say, the third type, all right, of dimension that you're going to kind of look at, all right, isn't really a whole different type, but it's something that you may hear referred to from time to time within Revit, are what are called listening dimensions. Okay, and listening dimensions are essentially the dimensions the temporary dimensions that change along with you as you're placing an object. So, for instance, this dimension here, right? If I'm in my window tool and going to place it, all right, is see how these temporary dimensions are changing along with me as I'm going and deciding where to place this window, right? So those dimensions that change as you're going to place something, all right, whether it's drawing the length of a wall, whether it's like I'm doing here and, dropping in a window, right, those are what are called listening dimensions, right, because they kind of listen to wherever your mouse is and they adjust accordingly. Okay, so that's kind of the little difference there, with the different dimensions, right, or the different types of dimensions rather within Revit. Okay, but for the most part, what we're going to focus on today are going to be the permanent dimensions, all right, and everything under the Annotate tab here. All right, so if we go back to the Annotate tab, we click on Aligned, all right. If you hover over it real quick, you can see the little description underneath it, all right, so it places dimensions between parallel references, or between points, all right. So if you click on Aligned, Dimension, okay, over here in the Type Properties, all right, or the Instance Properties rather, you can see we don't have any Instance Properties, but if we go into Type Properties and Edit Type, right, you can see this is where we can change all the graphics and settings for this dimension. Okay, you can see 3/32 of an inch right now, linear dimension. Okay, and you can see you can change everything from the string type to the leader. All right, leader tick marks, line weight of the actual dimension itself. Right, tick mark, line weight. So again, all kind of basically every element of this dimension line that you can adjust, right? Witness lines, center line symbols, right? Scrolling down even more, right? Your text, so you can change underline, italic, or bold, right? Text size, text offset, change the font around for the text itself, right? Background. Now this section here, right? Alternate units. This is where I was kind of telling you guys, if you remember back to the first class where we were talking about setting up your project units, right? we went into the Manage tab and we hit Project Units, and we selected whatever unit type we wanted to do and whatever rounding we wanted to do. All right, this is where we can tell Revit, all right, these dimension lines, all right, that we're going to draw, as we want these to either read a different unit or read a different rounding, right? So for instance, if this one here, so our 3/32 aerial, is I'm just going to duplicate it, all right, so that way I don't screw around with the default type, right? Instead of linear, I'm just going to say custom dimension, all right, 1, all right, okay. So that way any of the changes here in the type properties, I won't affect that default dimension line, all right. But let's say, okay, we want to switch around just for fun, your text, um, change this around, the font, I don't know, select something here. I just might select something random, right? Broadway, BT, sure. All right, but under alternate units, if you click on this, okay, as you bring, it brings up the format box, all right, similar to the same box that came up when we were setting the project units at the beginning of the project, okay. The checkbox here says use project settings. So this basically tells Revit that these dimensions are going to run off of whatever the default settings are. All right. If you uncheck this, you can see that you can change it around. Right. So where I was mentioning, if you're more comfortable, using, let's say, the metric system, or you're more comfortable using, the imperial system with feet and inches, but for your construction documents, you need to show them in the metric system, right? You can do that by setting your default project settings, right, under the Manage tab to feet and inches, so you know what you're working with, all right? But when you come here to the dimension, all right, if you now change this to meters, all right, or centimeters, or whatever units you want to use, all right, and set that, when you draw these dimensions out, they'll start reading in the metric system, right? Now, it's not going to change the size of your building. It's not going to change the shape of the building, right? It's just going to read the units out differently. Now, the same goes for the rounding. So if you remember, I went through the whole talk at the beginning about the importance of selecting your rounding, all right, and how it adjusts or affects how accurate your model is, right? So obviously 1/256 is the most accurate part, all right. Now the reason why I say it's always a good idea to model extremely accurately, all right, is if you modeled extremely accurately here, you know that your modeling and the dimensions to it that you have shown, all right, are extremely accurate. Now, if you're placing dimension lines, let's say on a regular floor plan, all right, you might want to keep this at the default, 1/32 of an inch. But the rounding that you're going to need to show on your floor plans, all right, is going to differ from plan to plan. So if you're looking at a regular floor plan, like I said, you might be fine with 1/32 of an inch. If you're doing something like a site plan, all right, you're probably not going to want something rounded to a 32nd of an inch, because on a floor plan that's a site plan, right, you're going to have a much smaller scale, okay, and things aren't going to be as accurate because you're not going to see them as much. Plus, when you're thinking about landscaping, is where to place trees and things like that, you don't get very exact with that kind of stuff, right? The views that you get very exact with, let's say like a detail view of, the window jamb as it goes into your wall, right? That might be at a 1/4 inch scale or something even larger, right? You're going to want the rounding to show a little bit more of a detail, right, and kind of smaller fractions, because when you get down to that small of a detail level, all right, and that big of scale, those smaller fractions of an inch actually matter. Okay, so again, it's going to depend on what you're drawing, right, what you're going to be using your drawing for, and really, in terms of project to project, you know, whatever you may want to change for your settings. Okay. In this case, I'm just going to leave it as use project settings. All right, as I'm not going to screw around with these and change them at all. All right, and I'll just go and hit OK. Okay. All right, so once you have these settings set, all right, so again, you can go ahead and change your units formatting if you feel like it. I'm just going to keep it as is. All right, underneath it you can see alternate units. All right, is what you can actually do is if you wanted to show both the primary units that you have set here, right, as well as have an alternate set of units. So let's say you wanted to show both the imperial in feet and inches and the metric dimension, right? You can do that, right? You can pick here if you want to show to the right or to the below, right? But basically that'll have you show both formats, right, for yourself. All right, and then you can see just underneath here, so alternate units, prefix, suffix, all right, opening height, suppressed spaces, right? Again, this is all just kind of visually, all right, how you want your things represented, okay? All right, so we'll hit OK there. All right, and generally speaking, whether it's the aligned dimension or the linear dimension or any of these are all going to have the same settings, all right, and you're going to adjust those in the same way. So if I clicked on radial, for example, up here, I went to edit settings or edit type, right, you can see that I have the same types of options here that I can change them around, all right, so we'll only really just go over the settings for one, all right, and you can kind of apply them to the rest of the dimension lines as well, all right. But with the align dimension selected, all right, is if you go on the top here, you can see pick where it says it has here. If you use the drop down, you can see individual references, or you can select entire walls. All right, so individual references is what I usually keep it on. All right, and that allows you to kind of quickly and easily select whether it's the center line of a wall or the finish facer of the interior or the exterior. All right, I usually like to use it a little bit easier than whole walls. All right, otherwise the entire walls, it goes and selects the whole thing and picks the center line for you automatically anyways. All right. But with individual references selected, right, you can see wall center line, wall faces, center of core. All right, this basically tells Revit what the default is of what it's going to select when you click on a wall. Right, so we're here where it says wall center lines, it's going to automatically default when you bring it over your wall to the wall center line. All right, and you have to physically tell Revit to pick one of the faces if that's what you're going for. Right, or you can change it to any of the faces, the center of the core, face of the core, and so on. Right, so again, those are just kind of the default settings for it, but you can obviously override it as you're drawing these out. All right, but essentially what you're going to do for a regular line dimension, all right, is because these dimensions are placed between two parallel references. All right, basically references can be anything from the center lines to the faces of walls. Right, if you're doing it for windows, most windows that you have will have a center line reference for your window itself, right, or the edges. All right, you're going to make sure that they're parallel. So if I wanted to do the dimension across the front for these two walls here, all right, select the left wall center line. All right, continuing on, click on my right wall. All right, after the second click, all right, you'll notice that this dimension pops up between the two reference points. All right, but you'll also notice is that your dimension line keeps going, right, which will allow you to select other things, right. What it does is it allows you to create a string of dimensions that are all connected to each other and are all related, right? Whereas this one, if I just want to do one dimension, such as this, right? As I click on my second one, if I bring it out here, say I want to place it here, and I just kind of click off into space, right? And that'll place that dimension line for us, all right? So you can see I screwed around with the text, so it's a little bit funky, right? But that's what you get for one of your line dimensions, all right? Now let's say if what I was mentioning there, the string dimension, right? So let's say if I start another dimension here and I want to dimension out where these windows are in the door, all right? If I go from the center line here, go to the center line of my window, all right? As I mentioned, this end of the dimension line is still kind of free and able to be placed on things before we place where this dimension line goes. All right, so if instead of clicking out here and placing where this dimension line sits, if you continue clicking on reference points, right, you can see that it adds another dimension into your string. Okay, so if we go and kind of continue that string, right, and once we've finished it, if we go and bring it down here and click, all right, place it, all right, we now have a string of dimensions so that not only is the window dimensioned out here, but if you select this, right, all these dimensions play off of each other. okay? And in a minute when we go over, I'll show you on the back wall here how you can use it, all right? But having a string of dimensions means that every object that you go and you dimension here in the string, right, they all have a relation to each other. Whereas if you were to draw dimension lines, let's say if we wanted to dimension this side here with these windows, if we were to draw dimension lines from this to this window, all right, clicked out here and placed it, right? So now that is its own one single dimension line, and then drew another dimension from here to here, right? Clicked and placed it, right? Did the same right there, okay? Now the difference being is that you still have the dimension between all three of these, but if you click on it, all right, you'll notice that it highlights one individually every single time, all right? And so obviously that they're not connected to each other. Now the bonus, or kind of the advantage to having them connected in a string, is A, if you need to move these, right, one of them only moves at the same time, whereas a string, they all move at the same time, all right? They all move together. Visually, it looks a little bit nicer, all right, when you move these around. Okay, the second benefit to doing it is as long as you have something that's in a string, okay? So if I go dimension from here, all right, I'm going to dimension the center lines for this back wall, all right, for these windows. Okay, place it there. All right, as long as these are a string of dimensions, right? So again, I've placed these all together, right? And these are all the center lines of my windows. And if I select this here, right? So again, all these highlight, it's a string, right? You may have noticed this little EQ with the line through it, all right? This is the equality symbol, all right? So what you can do is if you have multiple items like this, all right, and they're all kind of dimensioned to each other, if you click on this equality symbol, all right, what this is going to do is it's going to use the dimensions you have here. So the length of this point to this point, right, is two ends. And with these three objects in the middle, if we click on this, you'll see, all right, it goes and it automatically spaces these objects out equally. So these distances are now all equal, right? So if you have an option where um, you don't know the exact distance, but you know that you want these three windows spaced equally across this back wall, right, is you can do just like we did here, right, draw a dimension string all the way across, and then click on that EQ symbol, right, and that will automatically move these windows, right, to be lined up and have those all equal, all right. And now if you don't want this to show equal here and you want it to show the actual dimension, all right, is what I recommend is going clicking the equals button, right, it'll move all these windows, and then you can click on it again, all right. It doesn't move them back, but it basically goes and just shows now the dimension instead. So you can see those are now all spaced at 12'9". All right. So again, kind of a nice, quick and easy way to space things out evenly. I may have mentioned as we were going through things is that a lot of times I like to go and just kind of quickly place things out here. So I'll quickly draw my walls, place my windows and doors, and then kind of go back afterwards and fine tune it to put things exactly where I want them to be. Right. But again, that's the advantage of placing things on a string of dimensions. All right. Usually you have that EQ button. In this case here, right, if you select one of these, you don't have this EQ button because these dimension lines aren't connected with each other, right? This reads it as three separate dimension lines, okay? And just kind of quickly going through here the different parts of our dimension line itself, right? So if you remember when you went and clicked on the type properties here, so tick marks, right? So these are the tick marks here in between, right? In this case, diagonal 1/8 inch. All right, if you wanted to change it to a box, hit apply, right? You can see it changes there. Okay. Just switch it back. There we go. All right, so those are your tick marks. All right, your witness lines are these right here. So the lines that basically come down, all right, and basically point to whatever the reference point is that you're dimensioning to. All right, those are your witness lines. Okay, so you can see both your tick mark, right? The witness line extension, right, is basically on the top here. The witness line extension comes above the top. All right. Excuse me. Your gap to element, So where it has the 1/16 of an inch, all right, that means basically by default the distance that Revit will automatically leave between the end of the witness line and the object. All right, so you can see there it has between the window and the actual line itself. All right, now you can see you have these dots here. So if you wanted to adjust those to wherever you wanted them to, you can. All right, but again, this is just kind of the default that has itself set up. All right. Okay, and so now that you know how to place a basic dimension line, right, the rest of these dimensions are placed the same as well. Right, but we'll go over each one of them and I'll tell you kind of what the uses are between them. All right, so the line dimension, like I said, this is going to be your most typical dimension you're going to want to use. All right, so when you're placing dimensions, again, whether you're doing it for a drawing or you're spot checking yourself, the align dimension is pretty much what you're going to want to go to. All right, the next dimension here, so linear. All right, what the linear dimension does is, as you can see from the description, is it places a horizontal or vertical dimension, right, that dimensions between two points. Okay, now the difference between this is that where you see it says horizontal or vertical, all right? So this dimension will only show you distance between either in a horizontal direction or a vertical direction. Okay, so for instance, we'll show you, an aligned dimension to get a dimension along this wall here, on the diagonal. But if you said you wanted a linear dimension, all right, you wanted a dimension between this point and this point, all right, difference being here with the linear dimension, okay, is that it works off of points. It doesn't work off of kind of reference lines. All right. So if you were to select, the end point of that wall there, all right, and select inside one there, all right, as you can see when you go to place it now, is that it goes and it actually locks itself either in a horizontal, right, or in a vertical dimension. Okay, so you're not actually getting the dimension from this point to this point on the diagonal, right? You're either only getting a horizontal or a vertical. Right, you might ask yourself, why would you ever actually need that? Okay, is sometimes depending on what you're doing. So in a building or in a house, you're probably not going to run into it, but sometimes if you look at a landscape drawing or kind of a civil and utility drawing, all right, and you have an object that's kind of located off in space, right, kind of outside the building somewhere, all right, is there's no real easy way to figure out where that object is located. So let's say you have a manhole cover, or you have a tree, or you have something like that out here in space that's located off your site, right? But there's no real, landmarks right next to it that you can measure from, right? A lot of times people will use these linear dimensions to give you kind of a straight line to go and measure yourself off of. So instead of saying, from this corner of the building here to an object that's out here on the top right, instead of giving you a dimension that goes on a diagonal from this point to that tree and says that, on a 75-degree angle, go, 10 feet, all right, is instead it might say, okay, from this point, um, you know, vertically up from here is 15 feet, and then, take a right turn 90 degrees and go another 10 feet, right? And that kind of gives you an idea of how you can locate that, object without having any sort of landmarks around you. Okay, so again, you're probably not going to use the linear dimensions very much, but they are there, and just giving that example of something out in a site plan, all right, might be somewhere where you might end up using that. Okay, moving on to the angular dimension. All right, this is basically going to give you a dimension of the angle between two lines, right, or two walls, whatever it may be. All right, so if you click on your angular dimension, now you can select your first reference point, select your second reference point, right? In this case, it's those two walls, click, right? Gives you 117 degrees. All right, so pretty simple, much like the line dimension. All right, radial dimension, although I don't have a radius wall here, so let me draw one quickly. All right. Okay, if I have a wall with a radius like this, okay, if I go to annotate, radial, right, and I click on center line of that, right, you can click once to get the reference line, right, click the second time to place where that dimension goes, all right, and that gives you the radius of that line, all right, alternately the same thing with the diameter. Okay, you can see that you can go and get the diameter of that line. Okay. Now, the next one right here, the arc length, all right, this is an interesting one. So instead of giving you the radius or the diameter for this curve, all right, what the arc length does is it actually gives you the length of this wall along this line, all right. So what it's going to do is actually measure itself. If you were to start right here at the center point on the left side of this wall and actually trace along the curve, all right, to the other end, all right, what that distance would be. So it gives you the distance of this curve, all right. So if you went back, hit arc length, all right, kind of the first thing that you're going to want to do is select where that reference line is. Let's say the center line. Okay, we'll select that. Okay, we'll say we'll start here on this end, all right, and we're going to want to go to that end, all right. So that's going to be the second click. You can see now, click to place it, all right. So that is 10 foot 8 and 11/16 inches, all right. So if you went from that end all the way to this end, all right, and trace kind of along that curve, that's how long it would be, all right. So again, it might be something beneficial to do if you need to measure out the length of a curve for anything such as materials, things of that nature, all right. Now the other three here, spot elevation, spot coordinate, spot slope, all right. As I said, these are kind of spot checks. So if you were to hit spot elevation and select either the corner of a wall, or in this case, because I have a window here, I can pick the windowsill. All right, you can see the elevation is 3 feet right there at that windowsill. Okay, so that's how you can click and place that one. So again, if you have it in an elevation view or section view, you can do that as well. All right, if I open up an elevation view, even though we know the top of this wall goes to 10 feet, all right, if you went and did a spot elevation of it, right, you can do that, place it at 10 feet. If you come down here and look at the bottom, right, you can find out different parts of your window. Right, so something like that. Okay, so that gives you the elevation. Now what the coordinate does is, again, depending on whether or not you have coordinates set up for your building, all right, the spot coordinate will give you the precise coordinates of any spot in your building, right? So if you wanted this kind of northeast corner right there, all right, for that exact point, those are the coordinates. Okay, again, you probably won't have to ever use these, or you may not actually ever want to have your coordinates for your building, right? But what it does do is it actually, if you're going into the greater detail with this and using it alongside a civil engineer or anything like that, and that civil engineer is then going to go and plug, um, these points for your building into a total station and some survey equipment, and he's going to go out there and lay things out based off of it, right? Then you might end up in a situation where you would want to have, the most accurate coordinates for your building. In most cases, though, like I said, is you're not, but this tool is here, in case you do want to use it. All right. And then spot slope. I don't really have anything here modeled yet that has a slope to it, so I can't put one on it. But you can use that on your own if you do have a roof or anything like that. Is you can click the spot slope, and then just kind of click on whatever surface it is, and it'll give you that slope for you. All right. Now, the one last thing that I want to show you on the dimensions on how you can draw it is if you want to do an aligned dimension, all right, and you want to get the length across kind of a wall on an angle like this, all right, where something's not at a 90-degree from itself. If you use the aligned dimension tool, all right, And if you remember, we used it a couple different times when we were doing the curtain walls, all right, is the tab key, right? And the tab key basically cycles through different objects in the same spot with each other, right? So in this case, if we wanted to get the dimension along kind of the outside edge of this wall here, all right, to start our line dimension out, if you bring it to right here where this intersection is and hit tab, all right, you're going to want to hit it maybe 3, maybe 4 or 5 times, all right, and you're not going to be able to see it very good on my screen, and you're probably still not going to see it very good on your screen either, all right, so you may have to take it slow the first couple times you do it, okay, but if you go through and hit tab, all right, in my case I believe it was 4 clicks, so we have a hover, we go 1, 2, 3, all right, so 3 tabs, all right, gets me to this point here. All right, and basically you want it to be selecting the little point on the very corner of this wall. All right, and if you can get it to that, all right, with that tab key, then left click to select it. All right, and you're going to want to do the same up here as well. All right, where these two are connecting. So if we go tab through until we select that point. All right, now what you may end up doing is you may end up getting a dimension that locks itself either in the vertical direction or horizontal direction. All right. Now this can run into quite a pain, all right, because what it's essentially doing, and what you're doing when you're doing this line here, is instead of picking kind of the points, or the planes rather, of the center line or the face or anything like that, is you're picking really just this end point right here, all right, and so by picking the end point, is what it's doing is it's telling Revit, you know, I want to pick this intersection as opposed to one of these horizontal planes, okay? Now, normally, if you remember when we were talking about the align dimension, is you have to have 2 parallel reference points, all right? In this case, because we were picking a point instead of a plane, all right, Revit doesn't know where that parallel point is going to be. So you need to pick another one that's parallel to it. Well, what you're doing when you're selecting these points like this is, in this case, we've selected the one down here, all right? When we come up here and selected this one, right, if you remember what you just saw, and it locked itself into a vertical dimension, all right, is the first point that I ended up selecting right here. If I tab through again, all right, this one was 4 clicks, okay, is this one is actually selecting the wrong point. So this is actually selecting the wall intersection line or intersection point that sticks itself in a horizontal direction, right? So for this horizontal wall. So if I click, all right, again, you can see that it goes and it locks itself in this dimension. So what it's doing is saying, okay, we have a point here, and we have a point here. Both of them are on a horizontal plane. All right, so it locks itself in this dimension. So being a pain that it is sometimes you'll have to go through. And the reason why I say go slow the first time is because on each one of these points here where you have 2 walls connecting, is you actually have 2 different reference points you can select. So if I go through, right, select my one, okay, come to this one now, and we remember that when we selected the first dot, or the first point, is it locked us in a vertical direction, okay? So if we go through cycle, all right, until we get, right, there's the first point, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit tab again, okay, and basically that's our second point, all right, and it's going to lock us here and give us the dimension that we're looking for, okay? Now that may have seemed confusing, all right, and you're probably asking yourself, you know, what did you actually just do? It looked like you just collected the 2 points, okay? And I know it is confusing, and it's going to be confusing the first couple times you do it, right? But the thing to note is when you're going through here and selecting these points, all right, and you're tabbing through, is again, it's unfortunately extremely hard to see that point when it's highlighted, all right, that intersection point. So just remember when you're going through, go nice and slow with the tab key, all right? When you're selecting these, okay, so when you're going through, tab, all right, select the point, okay, when you come up here, all right, again, know that there's always 2 different points to these. So if you're tabbing through in this case, all right, Okay, there's my first point that it has highlighted. I'm going to hit tab again, right, and it's going to switch it to the second point, all right, and that's where it'll go and actually draw my dimension line for us. Okay, so like I said, it's a little confusing. Is walk through it yourself. Remember to use that tab key, right, and try and make sure you can do it yourself. If you can't, you're still having some problems, obviously make sure you get a hold of me and we can walk through it and see, what issues you may be having with it. Okay. All right. So that's pretty much it for your basic dimensions. Okay. And we'll kind of move on from the dimensions, but again, your aligned dimensions are pretty much going to be the dimension lines you're going to be drawing with 90% of the time. Right, and where these are your permanent dimensions, okay, these will show up, these will print, on your different sheets when you go ahead and we create sheets in a moment. Okay, but one thing to note as well, all right, with any of the 2D details that we draw here, right, in the text that we're printing, okay, whether it's the dimension lines, whether it's 2D text that we place here, all right, if you're familiar with AutoCAD, all right, or most other CAD programs, all right, you have, what's called your model space, which is where you draw your lines and things in, and then you have your paper space, right? Your paper space is usually, you have a space that is representing the size of your sheet, and you drop all your views on there, right? And you size them and put them on there to scale, right? And there's certain things that live in paper space and certain things that live in model space, right? Well, with Revit, everything kind of lives in the same spot, right? Now, when you do make sheets, you do kind of have that duality between the sheet of what's printing and what's actually going on, in your model. But with these 2D details, like the dimensions, all right, is these all kind of live within inside the model, all right? Now, with the text, right, so like the 12'9" here, if we go into our type properties box, all right, and take a look at, scroll down, all right, our text size, 3/32 of an inch, right? So whenever you're setting text size, all right, or the text offset or anything like that, these values for any of your annotations, all right, whether it's your text or your dimension lines, all right, this is always the size that it's going to print at, okay? So when it says 3/32 of an inch, all right, that means that these numbers here are going to print at 3/32 of an inch on a page when you print it at 100%. All right. Now this is going to matter depending on what your scale is for your view. All right. If you look at the bottom here, the bottom left, you can see this particular view happens to be in 1/8 equals a foot. All right. When we go through all our view settings, we'll change this around. Right. You'll see that when we change our view setting around, all right, and we change the scale, that it may look like this text is actually getting smaller or larger, right? But in actuality, is the text isn't getting smaller or larger, all right? Is the drawing itself and the scale of the building is actually what's changing size, right? So this text is always staying the same size. So this will always print out at 3/32 of an inch, okay? And when we change the scale of the drawings, right, this always stays the same, all right? And it's actually the building and the walls and everything else that changes the sizing when we change the scale, okay? Okay, and so now that we have, our dimensions down, right, we'll move kind of across the board here under annotations and show you guys the rest of the stuff here. So everything under detail, all right, these are all going to be kind of detail lines and all going to be 2D details that we can add. All right, so for instance, if we have, um, a little bit of extra detail we want to add into, let's say, a connection view that shows the connection detail between, our wall and our floor, all right, and we want to actually dig down deep into the details of it, and we want to draw in the bolts and the nut and an anchor bolt or something like that going down into the concrete, right? All those things can all be added in, all right, and kind of drawn on top of your model, kind of as 2D lines, all right. If you think of them as kind of CAD lines, okay. And what those do is they add a little bit more information, a little more detail into your drawing, right? But you're not actually modeling them in 3D, okay? So is a lot of things, like I said, either they're nuts, bolts, kind of connection details, anchors going into your concrete, edges of rebar, things like that. There's a lot of those things that you could technically find a family for them and load them in and actually model them, all right, in 3D. But those are all kind of objects that really they don't give you any sort of added benefit to model them in 3D, all right. But ultimately, you end up having to show them in views like your details and things like that. All right, so they end up being easier to just be able to draw them in using 2D lines and things of that nature. Okay, so everything here under the detail section, all right, detail line, for example, all right, if we click on it, you can see you can change the line style for it. All right, these line styles, again, if we remember, under the Manage tab, all right, and under Additional Settings, right, these are where your line styles, line weights, and all that can be set. Okay, but if we go under Detail Line, you can change your line style. All right, you can see all the different ways we can draw lines. All right, but basically we can go and just click on lines and kind of draw these out here. All right, any which way we please. Okay. And so now those lines we just drew, all right, these are detail lines. These are purely 2D, all right, so they live only in this one view that we have here. All right, so for example, if I go into any of these other views, all right, level 2, for example, all right, we're not going to see that. Okay, they only live in level 1. All right, and they only show up in 2D. So if I go to my 3D view, all right, if I click on my house to create it, all right, you can see that all those lines that I drew there on the floor, all right, they don't show up here in 3D. All right, so those lines under Annotate, all right, those are only 2D lines that can only show up in 2D plans. All right, either 2D plans or elevations or sections or anything like that. Okay, so that's what those detail lines are. Now regions, all right, these are basically your hatch patterns, right? But they call them regions instead of hatch patterns. Filled region is going to be something like a hatch. All right, a masking region is essentially just going to be a blank white spot that's going to kind of mask off a certain area. Okay, and so what's nice is a lot of times you can go and hover over these tools. All right, and it'll not only bring up a little description, but it'll bring up a little video too to kind of show you what it actually does. All right, so if we go to filled region, all right, over here in the properties, you can see in this case the filled regions we already have created, right? Diagonal crosshatch, diagonal up, down, horizontal lines, right? Solid black, everything from here, okay? So if we were to select one of these, okay, go into the edit type, you can see in the edit type properties here your fill pattern. This is where you can change this fill pattern around. All right, come into here, change this pattern. Okay, change the background from opaque to transparent. All right, change the line weight of it, change your color. All right, again, make sure that you go and you duplicate these. All right, it's very important to do that. Obviously, just like your walls and your doors. All right, it's important to be able to duplicate those so you don't accidentally change anything on accident throughout your whole building. All right, but essentially for these, once you come into it, it brings you into a sketch mode. All right, you're basically drawing the outline of where you want that hatch pattern to be. So if I wanted to say this little rectangle here is going to be that hatch pattern, okay, the check mark. Now you can see that we add that hatch pattern there. All right, and as I was mentioning, okay, again, this is just a 2D object, so this only lives in my floor plan view. All right, this doesn't live in any of my other floor plans or elevations or my 3D view. If we open that up again, all right, so again, you don't see that anywhere. Okay, so those hatch patterns there, they live here in this view. All right, components. What detail components are think of them as blocks in AutoCAD, right? If you are familiar with AutoCAD, is what you can do with blocks is they're basically groups of lines or drawings, right, of certain elements that are kind of saved so that you can kind of use them as like a stamp, like over and over again. All right, detail components are the same. All right, so if you clicked on component and do detail component, you can see here you have a couple loaded in for brick, and then you have one for a wide flange beam. Right, so if you're in a section view, okay, you can see that this component loaded in here, right, is basically a section through a wide flange beam. All right, so obviously you can go through with just your regular detail lines and you can draw this out freehand. All right, but the nice thing about the components is that these are already built, these are already made. All right, and again, you can just kind of add these in, and it adds a little bit more of detail into your drawings without having to model anything in 3 dimensions. Okay, so that being a wide flange beam, if you go back to the component base here, if you did load family, all right, I believe these are saved under annotations. All right, view architectural, those are all tags. Let's see if I remember correctly. There we go. Saved under detail items. All right, you can see they're all broken out by construction division. So everything concrete, masonry, metals. All right, so if you go to metals, steel framing, you can see you have a whole wide range and variety of these different profiles and things that you can load in as 2D blocks. All right, so again, they're just little kind of stamps, if you will, of 2D lines that allow you to add a little more detail into your drawings. And again, as well, especially thing to take note with this little stamp here of the wide flange beam is that if you go to your 3D view, you see that it doesn't model anything in 3D. All right. So again, it's important to know only because you do have the ability here in Revit to place actual structural members under the structure tab, right? If you go and you can place beams and things of that nature. All right, so you do have the ability to do that, right? But using the annotate tab in that detail component, right? This is just allowing you to put in kind of a 2D stamp, all right, to add a little more detail to your drawings. All right, revision clouds, right? For those who are making sheets and actually drawing out revisions for themselves, right? You can draw and use revision clouds here. All right, what's nice with the revision clouds as well is as you start to place these more and more for your documents, all right, Revit automatically tracks them and adds them to the title block on your sheets, right? So that's a nice thing to have, and that's a nice thing to be able to do and have Revit automatically track it for you. Okay. Detail groups, this is going to be similar to grouping everything else as well, right? So you can grab a whole group of different, whether they're detail components or lines, and kind of group them together that you can use over and over again. Okay. Then the insulation button here, all right, this is basically, your typical bat insulation. You can change the width of the insulation here and quickly draw a line and, basically give you the detail line for bad insulation inside your walls or your roof or wherever it is you're actually adding it, right? But Revit kind of has its own kind of quick tool for that, all right? And again, it's nice because this is a 2D detail, all right, element, and it doesn't show up in 3D, but it adds a little more detail into your, into your views, all right? And we'll add some of these elements as well when we get into kind of creating your different views, but for now, we're just kind of glossing over them at this point. All right. The next point of the annotation tab that I want to touch on, right, is your text. All right, so this is kind of your 2D text, and it's relatively simple as when you click on it. All right, on the left here, your properties, you can change the text and the text type. Right, in this case, the 1/4 inch Arial. All right, as you're making new types, as I recommend keeping the same kind of nomenclature here, where you change, you indicate the size of the text as well as the font. Right, so if you come into the type properties, right, you can see you can adjust the color of the text, right, line weights, the background, all right, the leaders and the arrowheads, all right, the font itself, text size, tab size, right, bold, italic, underlines, and so on. Okay, but like I said, is make sure that you duplicate these, and that I would recommend you keep the same nomenclature. So naming 1/4 inch Arial, all right, if you change it to 3/8 of an inch, Calibri or something like that, just make sure you name it something like that. Makes it a little easier when you're going through the different types. Okay, and then again, just take note that whatever you have here for text size, right, the quarter inch equals, or the quarter inch rather for text size, that's the size that's going to print out on a piece of paper. All right, so when we place this here, right, if I was to click, right, there's my text, and I was typing in, okay, you can see that it goes and places my text there, right? That's a bit larger than this text here, right, that I have for my dimension lines. But you know, because you have this set at quarter inch, right, that that's going to print out at a quarter inch. And so when you're looking at this view here, an eighth inch equals a foot, right, that's how large that quarter inch text looks, all right, in relation to the rest of your building. Okay. Now, once you have the text kind of in place like this, all right, if you select it, you can see you can move it around with the little arrows on the left, all right, the one in the top right, kind of rotate your text. All right. What you can also do is after you select the text, if you look under the Modify tab, you have the option to add leaders on either side. All right, so if you were to add a leader out like this, okay, you can kind of make little arrows and point to things. All right, which is generally speaking when you start to make detail views when we go over them. All right, that's how I usually make my text with my leaders. All right, to kind of point to different elements. All right. Now what I want to do is place another thing of text here. I'm just going to say metal. Okay. Now a nice feature with Revit is under the text here. All right, is you have spelling check. All right. So what this will do is if you hit check spelling, it'll bring you in here. All right, and it'll check the spelling for your drawings and the views that you're in. Okay. A nice feature which you can also use, all right, is this find/replace tool just underneath it. So what this allows you to do is Revit goes through and searches your project, right, and it searches for whatever word you tell it to do to find, all right, and it allows you to do kind of a mass replace of that word, right? So in this case, I put metal down here for a reason. If we click on find and replace, all right, and we say find, all right, we want to say metal, okay? So what Revit's going to do is follow your scope that you select down here. Right, so it says either just current view, you can click entire project. Right, so instead of just your current view, it'll search your entire project, every single view you have. All right, tell it whether you want to match the case exactly, match the whole word only. Okay, what you can do is say, let's say, we have a set of drawings, we bring it into the owner looks at it and says, you know what, I don't like that material on those drawings. I don't want that, whatever it is to be metal. I actually want it to be wood. And so you have to go back and you actually have to change all your details, right? So everything that calls that out as being metal, right, you now have to change it to wood. So if you can imagine a set of documents on a large project is, you may have, hundreds of drawings where you have to go back and every single time that you have a note pointing to that exact object that is metal, you have to now go and change that to wood, right? What this tool allows you to do is find and replace that one word, and you do it once and it finds every single instance of it and replaces it. So if you select metal, all right, I'm going to say find metal and replace that with word wood. Okay. If you click and do find all right, it'll go through and it says, okay, hey, we found a match here. It says metal found in level 1, all right, so your level 1 floor plan. Okay. And then once it finds it, you can go through on a case-by-case basis and either click on replace or replace all. In this case, I'll click replace. Okay. And you can actually see on the right here, it went and replaced that word that said metal originally with wood. Okay. So again, like I said, if you have something like that and you need to go through 100 drawings and switch them all, it's something nice that you're able to do. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing it with words such as metal or wood or, very common words that you're going to use over and over again in your drawings. Because if you think about it, you may have, the word metal sprinkled throughout your whole set of drawings, whether it's in different notes whether it's in details. You might have a note that calls out that says, metal panel, one that might say, metal decking, one that says metal beam, something like that, right? And maybe only one of those needs to change. Maybe the metal panel actually has to change out to wood panel. But if you do a search for just metal, all right, is you're going to come up with all those different instances, right? And you're going to have to, sift through all the different results. Okay, so again, is it something you can use to quickly find words and replace them? But just kind of be a little bit cautious with it, so you don't kind of do a big mass update and change every single word, um, and inadvertently change, everything when you only needed to change a couple words. Okay. All right. So that's pretty much it with text. All right, and the rest of the things here under tag, all right, just to the right of text, is we're going to go over tags kind of as in a general sense. All right, most of these, the multi-category, material tag, and all this, room tags, space tags, they all work the same as the regular tags. All right, it's just they're tags for their specific object, right, their specific family. Okay. Now, what tags are is if you've looked at a set of documents before, right, you're probably going to be familiar with, a window tag or a door tag, right? Basically, these tags give you a little information and kind of like a little number or a letter or whatever it may be. And it gives you information about that object to be able to relate that back to, um, either a schedule or something of that nature, right? So if you have a window and door schedule, a window might have a little tag that says 15, so it's window type 15. That way, when you go back and you check the window schedule, right, you'll see the 15. You can say, okay, that window is a type 15, and it'll give you all the specs on it, right? With Revit, what you're able to do is for every single category, all right, and every single object, okay, so whether it's a wall, whether it's a window, whether it's a door, whether it's steel beams, flooring, elements, or not, sorry, not elements, but materials, all right? Every single category in Revit has a tag associated with it, okay? All right, so these tags, like I said, give you a little bit more information about the object. Now, most of the time, these tags can be placed, when you're inserting the actual object itself, or you can place them afterwards, all right? And these tags are 2D elements as well, all right? So they're similar to the dimensions here. They only stay in this one view, right? So if you go from view to view, even if you see the same object, all right, you're going to have to place another 2D tag for it, okay? But again, they give you a little bit more information. So for example, all right, if we come up here under annotate, and we see here, we'll start out with the tag by category, all right? So this is kind of your generic tagging tool, right? And so if you click tag by category, right? And let's say we wanted to tag our windows here, okay? What we can do is if we just do tag by category, hover in, and hover over our window, right? And we click on it, right? You can see that it places a little tag here for us. Now we might have to drag and move it along so we can see it a little bit, all right? But number one, all right? So this window type happens to be window type number one, all right? And in a second, we'll go into what drives the numbers on these, all right? So why that's number one. But for now, just kind of placing the tags, all right? You can see we have tag number one. Now, as I was mentioning, if you click on the window tool here, all right, and you're placing these, as you may have noticed on the very top, under the modify tab, as you have this option here where it says tag on placement. So Revit will automatically place these tags with all your windows. All right, generally speaking, is I don't like to place my doors and windows with that selected, all right, because I feel like, as I'm building the model, is all those tags get a little bit confusing. It kind of muddles the drawing up a little bit. So I like to place them afterwards when I'm ready to put them in, all right. But you can place them as you're placing the windows and doors if you'd like, okay. But with the tag by category, all right, what this does is it automatically goes and places tags for whatever object you have highlighted, all right, and you're hovering over, okay, based on whatever that object is. So in this case, we went over a window, all right, it placed a window tag for us. I hovered over a door, it placed a door tag for us. we'll go and hover over a wall here, right? You'll see that it places it, but it has a little question mark, right? So it doesn't actually place anything, all right? Which essentially for the tag means that the value in the walls that drives the wall tag, right, for the specific wall isn't filled out, all right? And again, we'll go over here in a minute exactly what those tags are driven by, all right, for each one, all right? But again, so the tag by category, right, that allows you to place all these tags in here and essentially click on whatever object you're going for, and it will place a tag based on the object that you have selected. Okay. Now, some things, depending on what you have loaded in by default, you might get the message that pops up that says there's not a tag type loaded in for it yet, and it'll ask you to load one in. All right. So if you go to load family, all right, under annotations, all right, you can see that there's area tags in here. All right, a whole bunch of different tags, different annotation things. Right, architectural. You can see we have a bunch of different tags and things here as well. Right, so generally speaking, you're going to find all the different types of tags here in the family library under annotations. All right, so if for some reason something isn't loaded in, all right, you can load that tag in for yourself, so you can tag that object. All right. Now, the next thing with the tags, from tag by category to tag all, right? This is something nice for things like windows or doors, right? Where you might have a whole bunch of these in your project, and instead of clicking each one individually, all right, what tag all allows you to do is if you select it, right, it'll show you all the different types of tags that you have here. Okay, and if you scroll down, let's say window tags, select window tags. If we have selected all objects in current view, all right, if you hit apply, okay, you can see that it automatically goes, and now it goes to every single one of your windows, all right, and it automatically tags it for you, okay. And again, it's nice if you have something like windows or doors, we have a whole bunch of the same object in the view, and instead of clicking each one individually, right, you can use the tag all feature, all right, and that will go ahead and tag all those objects in the same view for you, all right, and then you can hit OK. Okay. Now what I'm going to do for the sake of variety here, all right, so I'm just changing a couple of my windows around so that they're different types, all right, so we don't have all the same type windows in here, all right, so then I can demonstrate a little bit easier for you guys what the differences are in our tags, okay. So you may be asking yourself when you're going and tagging all these windows and doors, right, is what makes this window here type number 1, what makes this window here type number 7, right, and alternately with the doors, what makes this door number 1, what makes this door number 2, all right, and if you run into the situation where, okay, that's great, Revit has by default named this door number 1 and door number 2, all right, but those aren't the numbering I want for the doors, and that's not the numbering I want for the windows, all right. Um, how do I change that around? Okay. So what's important with Revit and with tags is you have to understand how the tag actually works. Okay. And so what the tags are doing is it's essentially going and picking whatever object you have, right? And it's taking a piece of information that's in the properties of this object, right? And it's basically just displaying it out here on the tag, right? So in this case, let's think of this door, right? So door number 1, door number 2, okay? Our door tag here is showing number 1. So if we select the door itself, okay, now all your tags are going to work a little bit differently, right? But they're all going to be driven around the same general idea, okay? And the door tag, all right, because generally when you look at doors in a floor plan or in a project, right, is each individual door in a project, all right, is going to have its own individual number, okay? So that way when, you're going through a door schedule and the hardware schedule, you know exactly which door gets which hardware to it, and so on and so forth, right? So when you look at a set of documents or a set of construction drawings, all right, each door is going to have its own separate number, right? Now, generally, it'll be numbered based on, whatever room it's in and what it's connected to, and so on and so forth, right? We're not going to get into necessarily, the details of how each door should be named, okay? But just kind of keep the idea that, generally in a set of construction documents, each door is going to have its own individual number, okay? Now, if you think back to when we were talking about properties, all right, is we kind of went through um, the differences between type properties and instance properties, right? In that instance properties are all individual to that exact object, right? So the instance properties for this door are going to be different from this door, right? Which are going to be different from any of the other doors, right? And the same goes for the windows, right? The instance properties for this window is going to be different from the instance properties of this window, right? Because those properties are for only that one exact instance of that window or that door. All right. Alternately, the type properties refer to all the types. So whereas these are both the same type of door, right? They're both a 36 by 84 flush door. Right. If you select both of them, you can see they're both the same type. Okay. That means that if we go into the type properties and change any type properties, right, it's going to change both of those doors because they're of the same type. Okay. And so being that each one of these doors and the door tags, all right, are all labeled differently, all right, is that should ring a bell to you to say, okay, well, since they're all individually numbered, all right, is the property that drives these tags, all right, is going to be somewhere in the instance properties, all right, because each one of them is individual, each one of them only applies to that single door that we have, all right. And so if we look through the instance properties here, all right, and we scroll down under the identity data, all right, the value that drives the door tags is going to be the mark value. Okay. Now, again, this is specifically going to, um, refer to the door tags. All right. There might be other tags out there that you start to use that you're going to have to figure out kind of on your own and go through them. All right. But in this case with the door tags, all right, these work on the mark value. Okay. Under the properties, all right, the instance properties. All right, and if you scroll down to where it says identity data, mark value, this is 1. All right, so if you were to change this to, say, 15, all right, and hit apply, you can see that that changes your door tag number. Okay, so you can go through and change your doors and change the numbering however you want. Right, you don't need to just do numbers. You can do letters. You can do a combination of things. All right, but just keep in mind that because the door tags and the door numbering, all right, is individual and it does, it only affects that one single door. All right, that's why the mark value out here in your instance properties is the value that drives that door tag. Okay, is because the way that they get tagged is they get tagged individually. All right, and we know that the instance properties only apply to that one single object. Okay, alternately, all right, so we have door tags. All right, if we look at a window tag, all right, is generally speaking, right, and again, firms do it differently, all right, but generally speaking is if you look at a set of plans, all right, and you look at windows, is the windows aren't necessarily called out individually, all right, so they never generally say this window here is window 1, this window here is window 2, window 3, window 4, all right, but they're called out and they're kind of grouped by the type of window. So you're able to look at a plan and say this window here, this window here, this window here, this window here, all right, as well as the window on top here. All right, these are all window type 1s. All right, and generally you'd look at them and say, okay, all these windows are window type 1s. You'd go and refer back to the window schedule and it would tell you, okay, window type 1 is actually, this big and it has this for, the frame and so on and so forth, right? But you generally will see them called out only as the type of window, right? So not by the individual window itself, okay? And so that being the case, is as you can imagine, if you use the same logic we did for the door tags, all right, is because it's the type that gets called out, all right, with the window tags, is the value that's going to drive the window tag is going to be in the type properties. So if you scroll in here and look at the instance properties of this window, all right, where it says number 1, all right, under identity data, you can see the mark is number 2. All right, it has number 2 here. And if you change this around, all right, hit apply, you'll notice that that doesn't change that window tag. All right. But if we go into the type properties of this window, all right, and we scroll down here under the identity data, all right, you'll see we have the type mark, all right, serving a similar feature as the regular mark. All right, but if we change the type mark value here, all right, let's say this is type number 10. Okay. Again, keeping in mind the ramifications we have for changing this is that if we change this type mark value to 10 here, all right, this is affecting all of the 36 by 48 windows, all right, because we're in the type properties and it's going to change that value for all of the windows of that type, all right. If we hit OK, all right, you can see that it changes that window tag, all right, but it's not only changing that window tag, it changes it for the other type 10 window tag, and it does the same for the other type 10 in the project. Okay, so that's one of those instances where you're going to want to change it as a whole. All right, but again, just kind of looking at the differences between the two tags, between a door tag and a window tag, right, and the values that change the two of them and drive them. All right, just keep that in mind when you're looking at it. For instance, with the wall here is where we see that the wall tag has no value for it. Right, that basically tells us the value is not filled out. Right, and if we think of the same way that we normally see walls called out in a project, right, is generally you call a wall out by what type of wall it is. All right, so wall type 1, wall type 2, wall type 3, and so on. All right, so if we select this wall, all right, and we go into the type properties, all right, and we scroll down, all right, underneath the type properties identity data, so that type mark value, right, you see there's nothing in there. Right, again, so like I said, if we put a 2 in there, hit OK, right, you'll see that that type is now showing up as 2. Right, so again, because the wall tags work the same way as the window tags and they work off the type value, all right, because they're basically going to be calling out the walls by the type of wall that they are, not by each individual instance. All right, so again, that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. And as I mentioned before, all right, so if you go back to the annotate tab, all these other things here, beam annotations, multi-category tags, material tags, room tags, all right, these all work the same way, okay, but they're going to work for their individual objects. So room tags, space tags, all right, material tags, all going to work the very same way. Okay, tread numbers, so you can go ahead and it'll number your treads if you're looking at a staircase in an elevation view, okay, anything like that. Right, that's what these tags will work, and they work the same way as our regular tags. Right, keynoting we're not going to get into, all right, with this class. Depending on the project and what you're doing with it, it may require you to use keynoting. Generally, with residential construction and really small projects, is you don't touch keynoting at all. A lot of times, what keynoting comes into play is if you're on a large scale project, a lot of government projects, all right, we'll use keynotes and things like that. But again, we won't get into it because, we're kind of focusing on smaller scale here. All right. And the color fills and all this is, we're not going to get into these or the symbols right here because these, again, are just kind of 2D elements that we can place a little more information into them. And the legends and color fills, all right, will come into play a little bit more when we talk about schedules. All right. Okay, so that's pretty much it that I wanted to go over for the annotations. All right. So again, just keep in mind that your annotations, they're 2D. They only live here in this one view. All right. So as you go to other views, you're not going to be able to see them. Okay. And if you go to a 3D view, you're also not going to see them as well. Okay.